the court of Henry VIII, the courtiers who defended themselves quickly died quickly. That's what most people don't understand about conflict. The reflex that feels right is usually what gets you destroyed 500 years ago. In the most dangerous workplace ever invented, the royal court of King Henry VIII, the courtiers who survived learned the opposite reflex. The ones who defended themselves quickly died quickly. The ones who said nothing for 72 hours, then answered carefully, and only on substance lived. They lived under a king who beheaded two of his wives, his closest minister, Cardinal Wolsey's successor, Thomas Cromwell, his own legal counsel, and dozens of others on charges that were sometimes invented and sometimes not. The difference between the courtiers who walked away and the courtiers who walked to the scaffold often came down to that single discipline. They never gave the rule a written name. They didn't need to. They watched it work or fail year after year, and they trained their reflexes around it. What you're about to learn is what they learned, distilled, what the Renaissance survival code actually contained, why it worked, and how to use it now in your own life, in the kinds of accusations and attacks you're going to face this week. Start with a date. May 19, 1536. Anne Boleyn walks from her cell in the Tower of London to a small wooden scaffold built on the green outside. She's been Queen of England for 3 years. She's the mother of the future Elizabeth I, and she's about to be beheaded on charges of adultery, incest, and treason that historians have spent 5 centuries dismantling. The trial took 2 weeks. The witnesses were coached. The verdict was decided before she entered the courtroom. Picture yourself in the crowd that morning. You can see her speak from the scaffold. You expect her to defend herself. You expect her to name her accusers, to scream her innocence, to shake the platform with everything she has left. You'd do it, anyone would. But what she does, and what every survivor in that crowd notices, is something different. She gives a short, careful speech. She names no one. She protests no specific charge. She says only that she's been condemned by the law, that she will say nothing against it, and that she prays God to save the king and send him a long reign. A swordsman from Calais takes her head with a single stroke. The man who put her there is Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister. You should know how he did it, because the way he did it tells you what he was actually afraid of. Cromwell arrested Anne on a Wednesday. He executed her 17 days later. He chose 17 days for a reason. He placed informants among her ladies. He selected the witnesses himself. He pre-cleared the verdict with the king. And the structural decision that decided everything before the trial began was this: he denied her time. No private letters, no counsel of her own choosing, no window in which she could compose herself, sound out the court, find the gap between Henry's anger and Henry's calculation, and slip a wedge into it. He compressed her timeline because he knew that in any window longer than 2 weeks, the accusation against her would start to break apart on its own contradictions. What he denied her is the thing you have most of and almost never use: time. Think about the last time someone accused you of something. A boss in front of the team, a partner in an argument, a friend in a group chat, a stranger online. Now think about how fast you defended yourself. Probably within minutes, sometimes within seconds. You replied inside the meeting. You typed the response before you'd even finished reading the accusation. That's the speed Cromwell wanted Anne to operate at. It's the speed your accuser wants you at. And it's the speed at which you cannot win, because at that speed you're not thinking, you're flooding. Cortisol is in your bloodstream. The amygdala has hijacked the prefrontal cortex. Your face is hot. Your voice is tight. Whatever you say in that state will sound defensive even when it's true, and the listener will read defensiveness as guilt. There's peer-reviewed research from 2018 called Anger Damns the Innocent that confirms this in laboratory conditions. The angrier and faster you defend yourself, the guiltier you appear, even when you're innocent. The Renaissance courtiers didn't have the paper. They had the bodies of their friends in the ground. So here's what they did instead. When accused, when slandered, when ambushed in front of the king, they did nothing for 3 days. No defense, no letter, no private appeal, no emotional protest, no correction of the record. For 72 hours, complete silence. And then, only then, a measured response that addressed the substance and never the wound. You can call it the 72-hour rule. They didn't, but you can. It isn't written in Castiglione's Book of the Courtier, the bestseller manual that taught noblemen across Europe how to behave at court. Though Sprezzatura, the famous Renaissance virtue Castiglione made famous, the appearance of effortless dignity under pressure is one of its outer faces. It isn't named in Machiavelli's Prince. It isn't numbered among Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power, the modern translation of Renaissance court strategy that you've probably already encountered. But Greene's Law 4 always say less than necessary, and Law 6 court attention, and Law 1 never outshine the master, all orbit it. Green published his book in 1998. The courtiers had it in their bodies 500 years earlier. Now you need to understand why it worked, because if you don't understand the mechanism, you'll abandon the rule the moment the discomfort gets sharp enough. 3 things happen when you don't defend yourself for 72 hours. The first is that your accuser starts to lose certainty. In the first hour, they're absolutely sure. In the third hour, they're explaining the case to a fourth person and noticing they have to add a detail to make it land. In the 12th hour, they're explaining it to a sixth person and the detail is now bigger than the original claim. By hour 36, the case has been told so many times that small contradictions have appeared in their own retellings. Contradictions only their own voice could have introduced, because you said nothing they could be reacting to. By hour 72, the audience that originally believed them is starting to ask questions. The accuser cannot answer cleanly. You did this without saying a word. The second is that the audience moves on. There were 1,000 people in Henry's court at any given moment. The king's eye moved fast. The Duke of St. Simon, who spent 30 years secretly recording the inner workings of Versailles under Louis XIV, wrote that Louis's worst punishment was simply not to see you. His gaze would pass over a courtier as if nothing were there. But St. Simon also recorded what every survivor of that court understood. The gaze always returned. It found something else to erase, and you became background again. From background you could move. The same is true of your boss, your team, your friend group, your follower count. Attention has a half-life. Wait long enough and the original accusation becomes someone else's problem. The half-life of an online call-out in 2026 is somewhere between 6 hours and 3 days. Depending on the platform, it fits inside the rule. The third is the one most people miss. The third is what happens inside you by the third day. The cortisol is gone, the flush is gone, the tightness in your throat is gone. The voice that comes out of you is the voice you actually want representing you. You're no longer the person who would have replied at minute 1. You're the person who can decide what's true, what's worth answering, what's worth ignoring, and what's worth remembering for later. You become useful to yourself again. The first hours are the hours in which you aren't yet useful. The 72-hour rule protects you from yourself in those hours. This is also what people are pointing at badly when they tell you to stop caring what others think. The phrase has become its own kind of slogan, almost meaningless. What it actually means, and what Marcus Aurelius meant in his Meditations when he wrote that tranquility comes when you stop caring what they say, or think, or do, is not that you go numb, it's that you stop being pulled by the urgency to answer them before you've decided what's true. The 72-hour rule trains exactly that. You're not abandoning the case. You're delaying the part of you that would have lost it. There's a man whose life shows you what the rule preserves even when it can't save the body. His name is Thomas More. When Henry VIII required his nobles to swear an oath, acknowledging him as supreme head of the Church of England, More refused. Watch what he didn't do. He didn't argue against it. No public objection, no counter-sermon. He simply didn't speak at all. The silence was so politically dangerous that Henry was forced to invent a new category of treason to prosecute it. The Treason Act of 1534 criminalized what the lawyers called malicious silence, withholding speech in such a way as to deprive the king of his rightful title.
A king passed legislation because a man wouldn't open his mouth. More was eventually convicted on the testimony of a man called Richard Rich, Henry's Solicitor General, who most historians now agree was a perjurer who fabricated More's supposed confession. On July 6, 1535, Thomas More was beheaded on Tower Hill. His last recorded words were that he died the king's good servant, but God's first. Here's what you need to see. More's silence outlasted Henry. It outlasted Cromwell. It outlasted Rich, who became Lord Chancellor of England, and is now remembered mostly for the perjury that killed Thomas More. The men who broke the rule were eaten by it. The man who held to it became, 400 years later, a saint of the Catholic Church, and his name still signifies conscience in any language that has a word for it. The 72-hour rule isn't only about keeping your body alive. Sometimes the body is lost. What the rule preserves is the shape of you after the storm has passed, and that shape is what people remember, including, eventually, the people who tried to bury it. You can use this differently than More did, because you almost certainly aren't facing a king with an axe. So, look at someone who used the rule across decades, not days. Look at Catherine de Medici. She arrived in France at 14. A Florentine merchant's niece married into a royal family that didn't want her. The French court called her ugly, they called her common, they called her stupid. Her husband, Henry II, kept a mistress, Diane de Poitiers, who ran his bed and a great deal of his policy for almost the entirety of their marriage. Catherine bore his children and watched another woman wear his attention. She didn't defend herself once. For 30 years, she sat at the edges of power, observing, building a network of ladies in waiting, later called her flying squadron. Women trained to extract information from courtiers without ever appearing to extract anything. Then, her husband died in a jousting accident in 1559, a splinter through the eye. Diane de Poitiers was sent away from court within the week. Catherine took the regency for her son and held the central position in French politics for the next 20 years, through 3 civil wars and the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the coordinated assassination of Huguenot Protestant leaders that she orchestrated, and the slow disintegration of the French monarchy into the wars of religion. She was sometimes monstrous, she was sometimes wrong, but she was the most powerful person in France for 2 decades, and the patience that put her there was the patience she had practiced for the 30 years before that, when she said nothing, defended nothing, and watched. Her biography is the 72-hour rule scaled to a lifetime. So now you know what the rule is, you know why it works. You've seen what it preserves and what it builds. The question is what it looks like in your week, in the kinds of accusations you're actually going to face. Take 6 situations. Your boss accuses you in front of the team. Your instinct is to defend, in the meeting, in the Slack channel afterward, in the email thread that opens within the hour. Don't send one short line saying you'd like to come back to it on Friday. Then come back on Friday. By Friday, your boss has either forgotten the heat of the original moment, sharpened the case in a way you can answer cleanly on substance, or quietly dropped the whole thing because the room moved on. Your reply addresses the work. It doesn't address the wound your partner accuses you during an argument. Same rule, smaller scale. Step out of the room. Don't litigate the moment. Come back a day or 2 later when the body has settled with a single observation rather than a defense. The defense escalates. The observation lowers the temperature. You'll feel the difference instantly. A call-out finds you online. The entire architecture of social media is engineered to violate the 72-hour rule. The platform pays you an attention to defend yourself within minutes. Don't take the payment. The accounts that survive call-outs are the ones that pretend the call-out never happened because in 3 days the algorithmic memory of the platform has moved to the next outrage, and your silence reads retroactively as composure. The accounts that explain themselves get a second viral cycle. The ones that say nothing get one bad weekend, and then nothing a family member attacks you over a holiday dinner. You don't have to leave the room, eat, continue the meal, bring it up in writing 3 days later in a place where the person has to read what you actually said and not perform a reaction. The performance was what they wanted. The deferred written response is the version they cannot use. You don't get the promotion. Your instinct is procedural to email, to ask to find out the reason. Wait. The reason often surfaces on its own. Your patience surfaces with it. The candidates managers remember as composed are the ones who go quiet after a rejection, and those are the ones considered for the next opening. The ones who escalate are remembered as the wrong fit and considered for nothing. You don't want to be the second kind, even when you're right. A colleague spreads a story about you that isn't quite true. Silence is what kills the story. Defending it gives it more oxygen. 3 days of nothing, and a shaky story dies of its own weight, especially if the story isn't true. A true story behaves differently. The rule cannot make a true story disappear, and it isn't for that. If the story is true, you have a different problem, and the 72 hours are for figuring out which version of yourself is going to handle it. There's a small fact about Henry VIII that closes this for you. He outlived Anne Boleyn by 11 years and Cromwell, the man who killed her, by 7. Thomas More he had outlived by 12. He died in 1547, bloated with infections, a paranoid old man who had legislated against silence and could not legislate against the consequences of his own speed. Cromwell remembered the rule on the morning of his execution in 1540. He told the crowd he had come to die and not to purge himself. By then it couldn't save him. The other courtiers around him had been practicing the same rule for 30 years. They lived. Most of their names aren't famous now. That's what surviving in a hostile court usually looks like. And it's what surviving in a hostile life usually looks like too. You don't have a king. You have a boss, a partner, a feed, a family, 1,000 small daily tribunals that test the reflex differently every week. The rule the courtiers invented for the king works on all of them because the mechanism is the same: time on your accuser, time on the audience, time on you, 3 days, then answer the substance. That's the rule that kept their heads on their necks. That's the rule you're going to use the next time someone comes for yours.